Okay, Barbara, we are live.
Well, good evening, everyone. What a pleasure it is to welcome back our long time, I don't want to say old time, I'm going to say long time, a very dear friend, Thomas Perry, who I think is presenting us with his 28th book. I counted somewhat laboriously. Tom, are you a person who tallies the number of books you've published?
That's the correct number, 28.
Hey.
Uh,
And it is, in fact, a third, do I have that right? A third book about the butcher's boy.
Fourth,
Fourth.
right?
It is the fourth. Okay, I missed one that came, it was The Butcher's Boy, for which you won the Edgar for your very first novel. And then there was the one I'm missing, and then The Informant, and then this one.
Yes,
Sleeping Dogs.
Sleeping Dogs. Yep.
I should know that. I mean, my husband collects you. They're sitting in my library. Well, my apologies. All right. So we're catching up to Jane Whitefield, because originally you were going to do 5 Jane Whitefield, although I think you trickled on after that. But wasn't it the original Jane Whitefield deal was 5 books?
It was. It was. Actually, I'm working on one now.
You are?
I am.
How exciting. I love it.
Well-
Well, tell me this, Tom, why do you like returning to previous characters, but you don't really like writing a continuous series? What's the difference for you?
Uh, I was born with a very, very bad attention span. And so I have to keep amusing myself by doing something that I want to do. And occasionally I miss Jane, or I'll miss, something else. Or in the case of The Butcher's Boy, every 10 years or so, I learn something new that I have to put into a book. So,
And it also gives you a chance to revisit his past,
Right.
because a great deal of Eddie's Boy is, in fact, delving more deeply into his childhood. So you've had wonderful reviews for this book. And I thought that the review in the Washington Post really underlined the fact that you were able to make the scenes in the past just as lively and so as the scenes in the present. Do you feel any differently when you're writing, the 2 times? Is there a difference in the way you approach them?
uh, I don't know. I don't, it's one of those things that I sort of sit down and I begin to write, and I'm enjoying it, and I pursue whatever idea, comes to me. And at the end of the day, I just feel good if I think I did well. And if I did badly, then I pour myself a drink and forget the whole thing and try again the next day. I really am not very conscious about that sort of thing. Let's just say I'm one of the writers that actually enjoys writing.
You mean writing instead of having written?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Well, I mean, you wrote The Butcher's Boy in 1982. So, you're coming up on 40 years of doing this. And before that, you wrote for television, you and your wife, Jo, right? You did
No,
some
actually,
work.
we wrote after that. We wrote after I'd already written The Butcher's Boy when we started. In fact, and Metzger's Dog. I had written both of those before we were invited to write television. I was in my office at USC, and a man named Jim Corus, who was the vice president of something marketing and series or something, called me up and asked me if I wanted to write for television. So, I said, no, I don't know how to do that. And he said, I'll call you tomorrow. Just talk to somebody, think about it. And I walked down the hall to Joe's office, and I said, this guy called me up, and maybe we should think about this. What do you think? And then she said, you're bored here. Try it. If you hate it, we'll just go back to work.
So what were you and Jo doing at USC then? I mean, obviously I have skipped some of your origin story, so you're going to have to refresh me.
Yeah, it's heroic. It's extremely heroic, my origin story. No, I was raised by, no, never mind.
Gnomes.
We worked at USC. Well, actually, I started working at USC when we came to Los Angeles. I had worked at the University of California at Santa Barbara at the College of Creative Studies, which was where Joe was teaching at that time. And we met and married and moved to Los Angeles. And I started working at USC in 1980 while she was finishing her doctoral dissertation. And then she got a job at USC 2 years later when she finished. And there we were at USC.
So why did you start writing novels? I mean, I didn't realize that you were a Robert B. Parker story.
Did I what?
Robert Parker did the same thing, wrote the Godwolf manuscript while teaching. I somehow or other missed the fact that you did that too.
Well, I did everything. I was a factory worker. I worked in a state park. I was a commercial fisherman. I ended up working in universities because that was sort of the obvious thing to do. My family were all teachers, so there I was, lack of imagination. So I got a degree in English and started working in universities.
Well, The Butcher's Boy is not, a classic work of literature in the sense of, that we think of academics. So why did you, decide to write about an assassin? I mean, a hitman. I love those kinds of books, but it seems like an interesting choice for you.
Well, I came to it after I became bitter and bitter and sour on humanity. No, it was just an accident. I happened to I was thinking at the time about competence, and it was one of the things that I thought of, which would be an interesting demonstration of competence, would be to write about a hitman. To just sort of look into what does it take to be that. How do you learn to be that? What what do you have to be able to do? And things of that sort. And I started writing it, and it just was the first thing that I ever wrote that I thought that anybody who wasn't related to me by blood or marriage would actually want to read. When I sat down and reread it, it looked like it was kind of fun, and so I started trying to get it published.
So did you go that classic? I'm sorry. Did you go the classic route of finding an agent, or did you throw it over the transom, which you could do back then?
I ended up, this was actually a strange story too. I happened to, at the moment when I was trying to figure out what to do with it, I read an article that was in, I believe, The Atlantic, that was about the problem. It was a journalist who was trying to prove that it was impossible to get anything published unless you're an insider at that point. And what he did was he took the winner of the National Book Award from the previous year, typed out the first 100 pages, put his name on it, and sent it to all of the publishers, the major publishers. There were about, in those days, there must have been about 15 or 20. And what he discovered was that nobody recognized it and nobody thought it should be published. And so he wrote that, and it was in The Atlantic one month, and I happened to read that. And in the letters the following month were letters from all of the different major publishers saying, you're being unfair. We can't possibly find notice every good piece of writing that's out there. And what we do is we have a procedure, and the procedure is that we have agents out there who read things, and they refer them to us. They say, such and such an editor would probably like this book, and so I'll submit it. And so what this journalist did was, during the next month or two, he wrote, he got himself a fresh copy of the same book, and he sent it to all the major agents who were in the, they had actually a kind of a booklet that was from the Authors Guild, that
Yeah.
listed all of the major agents, all the reputable agents. And he sent an inquiry to each of them, and some of them wanted to read the book, and some of them read the book, and none of them recognized it, and none of them thought it should be published. And so what he was doing was trying to discourage people like me and say, you know, you'll never get it published. There's no point in even doing this. See, the whole system is corrupt. And what he actually did, though, was to tell me exactly how to do it, how to go about it. I wrote to the Authors Guild and got the same little blue booklet full of the names of agents, and sent them my letter of inquiry and my synopsis of the Butcher's Boy. And one of them answered me and said, you know, send me the book. Or actually, he didn't. He said, who are you? Tell me who you are. And I described who I was, which was basically a long way of saying nobody. And he said, send me the book. I'll read it. And so I sent him the manuscript, and he read it, and he sent me a letter. You know, all of this stuff took forever, because in those days it was mail. It was regular, you know, you would actually get a little letter that said, you know, I'll read it. And so he read it, and he wrote me a letter, actually pretty quick after that, like 2 weeks or something, that said, I like it, I'll try to sell it. And so he sold it to Suzanne Kirk, whom you know well.
Indeed.
Yeah. So.
Well, Suzanne had a fabulous eye for acquiring new writers. I mean, over the years, the number of authors that she gave a start to are absolutely phenomenal. You, Patricia Cornwell, William Tapley, Philip R. Craig, Deborah Crombie, Sharon McCrum. I can't even remember all of the. Patrick, do you remember some of the authors that Suzanne published first?
John Dunning, right? I mean, at least for the Bookman's series.
Yeah.
Gosh, there was somebody else I was just thinking of that was big. Was Nevada Bar hers?
No, but Kathy
No.
Reichs.
Kathy Reichs.
Yep,
Yeah.
Kathy Reichs.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not at all surprised that she would have acquired you. She was just had a terrific eye. So here you are, you know, 28 books later, still chugging along. So why did you decide to go back to Michael? Is it really kind of an every 10 years something tickles your fancy and you think you'll revisit it?
Well, what happens, I think, is that you age. And as you age, you learn things. And you realize that they were things that you should have known. You know, that you wish you had known at the time when you wrote the last thing. And so what you do is try to do a new version with the information that you've picked up just by living. Or maybe you realize that something has changed radically since the last book. You know, in other words, if you look at those 4 books, you would say to yourself, this is somebody who's writing about the way things were in 1979 or so, and then 10 years later, and 10 years after that, and 10 years after that. But I actually wrote them in those years. So not only were there not, I don't know, computers and cell phones available for the first one or whatever, but I didn't imagine them. They were not things that were in my mind either. So, you know, it's kind of, my ignorance of the future was profound, and I'm using it now.
Well, I've always thought that The Butcher's Boy was a fabulous title and almost signaled what his profession would be, because let's face it, if you're going to be a successful hitman, a keen knowledge of human anatomy, or any anatomy, would be an essential tool, you know, how to go about killing people efficiently. So remind us of how he came to be the Butcher's Boy. How did he get to Eddie? And now you're calling this Eddie's Boy because Eddie is in fact the butcher under whom he trained.
Right, and he's the source of the name. He's what we didn't realize, what you don't realize in the first book at first, is that the name The Butcher's Boy, which is chilling, was actually a completely mundane thing, that he was the son of Eddie the Butcher. Eddie the Butcher was really a butcher in Pittsburgh, and he has his own shop, and he's really kind of serious about the shop, and he's good at it and stuff. And what happens is that this child is brought to Pittsburgh by his young parents, who may be graduate students, they may be something else, but they are hit by, or they're killed in a car accident. And the people of this neighborhood are kind of a close-knit group, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this kid, because they don't want him to be sort of put into the system. They don't want him to go into a situation where he won't be well cared for or anything of that sort. And so a lot of the people who are kind of the owners of the neighborhood, or the I don't know, the burgers, the people who kind of run the neighborhood, get together, and they have a meeting, and they say, what are we going to do with this kid? We can't just turn him over to the cops. They'll take him to the county or whatever. And so Eddie says, okay, I'll take him in. I've got a place for him, and if he takes to it, I'll be able to teach him my trade and so on, and I'll raise him. And all the other people kind of agree to do that, because that means they don't have to do it, and they don't have to see him be taken off by the police. So Eddie does. He teaches this boy both of his trades. And one of them is being a legitimate butcher, and the other is being a hitman. And he teaches them both. And so that's how he comes to be, and that's his origin story, really. He's called Michael Schaefer through most of this book, because that's his favorite fake name. He doesn't have a real name that he ever uses in the series anywhere over the 40 years. He just has a couple of aliases. So
how much did we know about Eddie's origin story? Do we, before this book, did we know a lot about how Eddie became, I mean, it's easy to see him becoming a butcher, but how did he also become a paid assassin?
Well, and that's actually, this is the first time that I answer that question, I think, in all of the books. I think in Eddie's Boy, he elaborates the fact that he went into the service during the very early moments of the Vietnam War, and the Army, as it does, sent him to technical school to learn how to be a butcher. So what he tells the boy is, the Army taught me both of my trades. That is, killing people, which is what armies are for, and learning to be a butcher in a sort of legitimate school.
Well, I can see him mastering the trade, but still, to be a successful hitman, you have to have some sort of mechanism. I mean, it's like getting an agent if you're an author. How is it that you get contracts in order to, become a killing machine?
Well, in his case, what happens is that a friend of his is part of a sort of crime family, a crime-inclined family, and he needs somebody to help him do a job. And so he says, okay, if you're willing to do this, I can get you some money for it. And once you get started, there's a reaction. Either you like it or you don't like it. And Eddie, finds he's completely neutral. Eddie doesn't really have a conscience of the sort that we flatter ourselves to say that we have. Eddie's it's a job, just like any other job.
Yeah, so it's really pragmatic, it's about money. It's not about some depraved psyche or, weird psycho, whatever it is, but it's a job where he can make money. And then, so at some point, Michael, as we're calling him in this, Michael finds out or learns that Eddie has got a second job. And then Eddie it's like a guild. I mean, it's like he takes him out as an apprentice and
Yeah.
teaches them this. It's very medieval in that structure, which I think. And I was thinking about that today because after all, it was the Black Death, the plague that basically broke up the feudal system and allowed the rise of guilds and craftsmen and this whole concept of the apprentice system. And here we are in another one. I'm sure you didn't write this book because we were going to be in a pandemic when we found out that Michael was basically a medieval guild sort of a guy. But it's interesting that it turned out that way, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just one of those things that you write something and then all of a sudden you realize reality is starting to turn that way, and you begin to get superstitious about it. But that was sort of an accident. Obviously I didn't know the pandemic was coming, or I would have started stocking up on toilet paper right at the beginning.
And made a killing in case you couldn't get this book published. How funny. So in the course of pursuing your career as a hitman, you're obviously going to come across criminal types. And so what happens to Michael is that his past keeps coming back to haunt him, right?
Right.
And in this particular book, we don't know what past has come back to haunt him. So I loved your setup. I mean, he's been leading a life of relative security and ease with Meg, his aristocratic wife in England. And what happens? They go north, right? They move from Bath up to Yorkshire to open up the manor house.
Well, yeah, she's a person who every year, as summer begins and it gets warm enough, will go back up to the family, sort of the old family home, the place where her aristocratic family is supposed to own, and she would have a party, sort of a welcoming party for all of her friends and the people of the village and so on, and that's a tradition for her. And she's a sort of graceful person, and he is sort of her curmudgeonly husband. That is, he always wants to be sort of ignored and left alone and so on. So he's always trying to stay in the background for obvious reasons, but also it's really temperamental too. But she, in opening this the season again, essentially attracts let's say some notice, and really it's essentially it attracts 4 people who have been sent to kill him. Because in the very first book, when what he does to get out of trouble is to have essentially frame the mafia don that is angry at him, and get him sent to prison for life for a murder that actually was committed by the butcher's boy. And he does it by burying the head and hands of a victim on the horse breeding estate in Saratoga that is owned by this mafia don. And what happens later is that from time to time somebody will try to collect on the anger of this mafia don who is sitting in prison languishing for essentially 30 years, and keeps reminding people that he'll pay enormous amounts of money for anybody who finds this man and kills him. So every once in a while, somebody tries again, or somebody happens to see him, or happens to suspect that he might be, in this particular place rather than that particular place. And so now and then, his past comes back to him fresh. That is, you're about to be punished for what you did 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, whatever it was. So,
well, I suppose, I mean, there has to be a reason for these guys to show up, but it's not guaranteed that they're really coming from Bala, I think was the name of the guy. It could be from another source. And in fact, we can get into that. But let me ask Patrick, you read an awful lot of, Richard Stark and other books like this, Patrick, like me. Can you recall anyone else who has a sort of similar career trajectory?
Well, I was actually going to ask about Westlake, because he was, a the generation just before yours, really, but you guys kind of merged for a good bit. Was he an influence on you at all when you were starting to write?
He was. I admired him, you know,
Yeah.
but it's funny. My second maybe editor, Joe Fox at Random House, knew him and said, you know, you really have to be careful, you know, to sort of not do as much comedy as you're writing. You know, I was always sort of allowing myself the fun of
Right.
ironic or making jokes or whatever. He said, because look at how wonderful Donald Westlake is. And, you know, he really, if he wasn't funny, he would be a zillionaire. You know, that is, he would, you know, people would love his books and respect them more than they do, you know. And I think in a way he kind of warned me away from I don't know, my Westlake-like inclinations. You know, I became more serious. I think after he said that to me, I wrote a book in which the first sentence was something like, so and so looked down at the 13th body. No humor after that. You know?
But you do always have a high body count. That's, you know, at least in these books for sure. You had a wonderful review on the Washington Post and on this topic. I'm going to quote it. One of Perry's unique talents is his ability to tell what is essential story over and over again, while continually finding ways to make it fresh and absorbing. This is true not only of the Butcher's Boy series, but of his popular Jane Whitefield novels. And, you know, basically you've got, you really like procedure. You and I have talked about that. You know, you loved working out in the Jane books, how she was going to make people escape and disappear. I mean, a lot of craft involved and generally moving across the landscape in order to do it. It wasn't like everybody sat around, you know, in Studio City or something. They were really traveling. And you do the same thing in this book. We're starting in England and then we go to Australia where it might be safe. And then we're on a plane to the United States and that's not working out. And, you know, so in many ways, it's the same things that, you know, you like to deal with. What fascinates you so about how people go about things as opposed to necessarily why people go about things?
Well, I think the why is often something that you discover over time, and the character doesn't always know immediately why they're doing it, or that they couldn't necessarily explain it. But I like things that give me what I feel is the texture of reality, what it's like to be alive. And, you know, what you're doing is dealing with all this stuff, all these things, these objects, these tasks, and so on. It's just, you know, it's the way it feels to be alive. You know, you have a phone call and it's a surprise and it's you know, something you have to deal with, and then you set the phone down and, you know, damn, something just shot through my window. What am I going to do? It's something that, you know, I sort of feel comfortable in. That's the world that I look at. And the Jane thing is always fun because, you know, Jane Whitefield, when she walks into a room, she knows she may be in terrible danger because she hasn't been in that room. You know, what do I see? Is there a second way out of here? Or is the only way out the way behind me that I just came in? Is that somebody over there looking at me a little with too much interest? Is that somebody who's, you know, trying to harm me? If he is, what do I do? If he isn't, where do I go? What, you know, things like that. That's really what, you know, what it feels like. And you know, procedure is life, I think. You know, we get up in the morning and all this stuff starts to happen.
Well, they're very propulsive. I mean, I think all of your plots, it's all about forward motion. And, even in this one where you have flashbacks, it's working the same way. And a cat and mouse kind of thing develops. I think in your book, The Old Man, and I wanted to ask you how the movie is going with The Old Man, but, that's another one where, he starts out and it looks okay. And then, but he's really got, secrets in his past, and then something, he has to go on the run, and then you get the whole cat and mouse thing going on and you're moving around. I loved it because we spent time in Chicago, which is, where I grew up. So I like that part of it. But, it's really the same elements that you enjoy using, but you've given it a different protagonist and a different landscape and a different predicament.
Well, I sort of want to defend myself against a good review. That is what he said was gave me credit for essentially telling the same story over and over again. But in a sense, if you look at either detective or police procedurals of any kind, which I don't write, but every time that person is a police officer, a detective, is going to be involved in essentially the same story. That is, somehow or other, a client or a citizen or someone will let him know that a murder has taken place, or that they're being threatened by someone, or whatever it is. But he's going to go into his mode of being, a problem solver or crime solver or mystery solver every time, every single time. He's going to go out there, try and figure out what happened and who did it and how to get to him. In a sense, we are all obsessive about these events. I think the thing that I am obsessive about, or would be guilty of, I probably shouldn't admit it, is that I'm kind of fascinated with the story of running away from whatever it is. Something is after you. What do? First you try to evade whoever's after you or whatever's after you, and then eventually, you have to turn around.
Sure. Patrick, what's the Jim Salas novel that is a variation on that about the spy?
Oh yeah, that's a great book. I think it's called Death Will Have Your Eyes. And the conceit is that this is after the post Cold War, when all these agents, find themselves kind of out of work, and it has these two particular former agents that are sort of tracking each other around the country. Really terrific, good road book. One of the things actually I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, I thought at the very beginning I thought was very revealing, was about competence. And that's one of the things I really like about your books, is that we learn about, each of them has a very specialized kind of, in some ways, sort of arcane knowledge, and, Jane certainly does. And how difficult, I guess the big challenge now is it's a lot harder to disappear in today. Technology is tracking our every move everywhere now. And so, especially for a Jane Whitefield, which is it okay to tell the people that she might be making a return visit here soon?
Sure.
Yeah, we have a couple of people on Facebook that are asking about that. But how difficult is it to adapt Jane's particular expertise into today?
It's difficult for me because in the first place, when I first started writing about Jane, which was like 1990 or so, it was pretty easy. You could walk into an airport and plunk down $500 and say, "Give me a ticket to New York." And if they ask you your name, you could say anything. You could say Christopher Columbus, and they'd still sell you the ticket. They would not search you. They would just let you on the plane. Obviously, that isn't happening now, and it's been a long time since it could happen. People used to do things like to get a false identity, like going around and looking at gravestones. And essentially apply for a duplicate of their birth certificate, which was, from 19, whatever it was, whatever. And all of that stuff was easier because nobody was looking. She's always told her clients, whom she calls runners, it's whether you get caught depends mostly on who's looking. If it's a private detective in Cleveland who, somebody hired for a small amount of money to go find you, you probably will outsmart them. If it's the FBI, you're screwed, because they have unlimited numbers of people to go look for you, and they have access to virtually everything. And it's gotten much, much worse. But the way Jane has to travel now, and other people who are doing that sort of thing, is you go low class. You don't pretend to be, a lawyer from Philadelphia, because it's too hard to prove to anybody. What you do is you have to travel by car instead of airplane. You can't really travel by train either. If you want to get a car, you don't want to rent a car, because that's, you're opening a credit card and all of that stuff. What you want to do is buy a used car from an owner with cash. And you're lucky in a way, because most people who are selling their own cars don't want a check because they don't trust it. They want cash. So you buy a cheap car for cash, and you drive wherever it is that you have to go, and you pay cash for whatever you can, and so on. And it's a less, let's say it's a less glamorous way of traveling, and it takes a lot more care. You really have to do a lot.
Have you had to learn kind of a new way of using technology, in a sense, to throw people off the trail? Use Facebook to create an alternate identity, or set up, things like that.
When things come my way, I use them. They stick to me, but you could spend your whole life doing research on this stuff, but I'll give you an example of one of the things that's really good. Apparently a year ago or so, there were a group of people who were doing research at the University of Chicago about the ways in which facial recognition technology works. And they discovered that, you can't beat the normal way that it works, in which, because it measures the exact distance between your eyes, and, all this other stuff, proportional things, which are being used, everywhere. And it works terrifically well. But it is possible to substitute an image, or to put out there an image of yourself, and change a few pixels in the picture. Because what they're doing in the technology is not looking at you, they're looking at a picture of you. So what you do is you change a few pixels, and the machine will no longer recognize you. None of the machines will recognize you, because those pixels have been changed. So, for the moment, they're up. There's a way of defeating that, and there's all kinds of other stuff going.
I like the notion that, this is something specialized that not everybody can do, and I think it was a few years ago, Barbara, you might know, didn't we talk a little bit about Joe Gores and his, he was an expert about burglary, and he had a kit and tools that he would demonstrate. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, he had a repo man that I was particularly fond of. He wrote a book, I think it was called 32 Cadillacs, that I thought was the work of absolute genius. He was
the DKA files, wasn't that?
Yeah, he did those too. He was a real private investigator, an authority on Dashiell Hammett as a consequence of it. But Tom, I was thinking in this conversation, the other problem is that surveillance techniques are so much more sophisticated. You have drones, you have tracking things, you have to disable cell phones. We were watching a really kind of silly drama called Wild Bill with Rob Lowe, the American police chief of Boston, a city in the UK, which is, a pretty absurd premise anyhow. But in the course of it, while something is going on, some guy bumps into him in a crowd and picks and hands, rather, says, "Here, you dropped it." And Lowe sticks it in his pocket without ever even thinking about it. It's just a nice guy, picking up his money. And then at the end of the program, we discovered that in fact the pound had a tracker on it, and this was a bad guy, and he used that to track Lowe to whatever destination where the big confrontation was going to take place. And so you've got two problems. You've got you've got all that stuff coming at you, and you also have to figure out how to disable it or at least circumvent it. It is much more complicated. Patrick's right. You can't just like hair or change your glasses or,
It's terribly hard. It really is in some ways. One of the things that we've been doing here is watching all of these TV shows from various countries that show the smugglers. The U.S. Customs, the British Customs, and others, all of the stuff that they have and ways that they have of picking people out at border crossings, and that's pretty amazing, pretty sophisticated. But occasionally you get sort of a funny side to it too. That is that there's perhaps the most watched society in the world now is probably Britain, because they put so many CCTV monitors up all over, and all over the place, and they have people monitoring them 24 hours a day. But if this sort of gave me heart one day, because I read that it has affected Britain's crime statistics not at all. It has had no effect whatever on the amount of crime, or in essentially catching people for crimes. That it's just empty, it's hardware, and it's up there. It might as well not be plugged in, because it has no effect on whether they catch people or not. So
amazing. Let me talk to you for a moment about Elizabeth Waring, because it isn't 100% clear when the heavies hit Meg's manor house and mayhem ensues and Michael has to go on the run. It isn't entirely clear that it might be the crime boss. It could also be that Elizabeth Waring, who's been pressuring him to be an informant for the Justice Department back in the States, maybe using the crime boss's leverage or, other stuff. I mean, you can't just have like one villain here. You might want to suggest there's another one. So she's been a recurring character in at least a couple of books.
Well, all of them. She's been in all of them. She's the person in The Butcher's Boy, the way The Butcher's Boy works, the original. What happens is that Michael, let's call him Michael now, is essentially trying to create a false impression for everybody of what's going on in the world of crime. What he's trying to do is to get important mafia people to think that they're at the beginning of a mafia war, and that they're therefore in danger. And so he begins, killing one guy, and maybe, let's say, attacking his nearest neighbor later or whatever, and then going on to another crime. And all the way through the book, the only person who ever realizes what must be going on is Elizabeth Waring, who was a very low-ranking Justice Department employee at that time. She's like 23 years old or something like that. She's right out of college, and she's got the job of interpreting, a very small and narrow number of reports every day, and reporting to her superiors what was happening and so on. And as the books go on, Elizabeth gets older by 10 years each time, and she gets wiser and more experienced and so on. And so she becomes more and more dangerous. But in the first one, she's, just this person who is very frustrated because her bosses have sent her off to be on vacation because she is the person who figured out that this mafia don can't possibly have killed this person, and that he's going to go to jail for nothing. And even though he's a very guilty and horrible person, she's the only one who keeps insisting, hey, we can't send this guy to prison because he didn't do this. He did a lot of things, but not this. And she sort of gets more and more scary in a way to him as she goes along, because what she does is offer him the kind of deal that Joe Valachi got, 40, whatever it was, 50 years ago, where you talk to us and tell us everything that's going on in the mafia and we'll protect you, but the protection is being in prison. And eventually a lot of people in prison want to kill you. So,
or you have to go into WITSEC, which is, not much fun either. So Michael's goal in Eddie's Boy is just to get back to a quiet life. I mean, he wants to evade all this. He's not trying to profit from it. He's not, he just wants to outwit his pursuers and, with any luck, quash them and go back to Meg in England. Whether he succeeds, we won't mention. Patrick, have you got questions from Facebook from people?
Well, let's see here. I have a comment from a customer who says that this conversation makes me think of the low-tech Jack Reacher character traveling the country.
Well, in a way, a bus is almost a perfect way. I don't know what security is like on a bus, because I didn't think I've taken a long distance bus. Are they as tough on surveillance and identity as other transportation?
I haven't traveled on a bus a long distance since the year I was looking at colleges to go to. I was like 17. It was the last time I took long distance bus. I just, don't know.
Well, Reachers, traverse the country under the radar on buses. So maybe it's possible. Right.
Well, I mean, it used to be certainly possible. I mean, it all you had to do in those days was to, in 1964 or so, you could certainly travel without being identified or whatever. I don't know what it would be like now. I mean, certainly they must be watching. I mean, it's we have so many more people who are employed in searching for fugitives and terrorists and whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching that, I think a Netflix series about Ted Bundy, and they were talking about, how difficult it was to track him down, and they're like, well, he left the state and we just couldn't, we just lost track of him, and so, back then you could just go across the state line and it, the communication wasn't what it is today between the agencies and all that. It was interesting to think about that.
Well, they didn't have the databases either,
Yeah.
Britain being
Right.
small had I'm trying to remember what they call it. It has a wonderful name, a database for crime. But because it's a small country and basically one major police force, the Scotland Yard overseeing it all, it's very hard to do that in the States. But I think we probably have bigger databases now, don't we, Patrick, through the FBI
yeah.
and
Absolutely.
Homeland Security and all the rest of it. They call it Holmes. That's what they call it. And I've always loved that in the UK. Holmes, HOLMES. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's really true. Sherlock Holmes is honestly never going to go away. He just permeates the whole world. People who don't even like crime fiction know who Sherlock Holmes is.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Anything
Actually,
else, Patrick?
in a way, the more interesting character is Watson, when you think about it, because I mean, he's the one who's providing the consciousness. He's the ordinary mind that tells us what's going on, and he
Kind of translates it for us, kind of.
Yeah, right.
Virtually every genius hero has to have some sort of a interpreter. You know, Nero Wolfe has Archie Goodwin. You know, because if he is a genius, then the ordinary person can't really keep up. So you need that intermediary to
Right.
make it work. Patrick, is there another question?
Um, well, my own question is, I always ask you about one of my favorite characters you've written about, which is it Jack Till?
Oh, yeah.
Any chance of bringing him back?
It's conceivable. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, Jack Till is a good guy. He's like a real genuine person who really wants to help people, really wants to, well, actually is even willing to put himself in terrible danger to help people and so on. And, you know, that's a lot of effort. We'll see. I would have to have an idea that was new and was going to tell us something about Jack Till that readers don't already know, and I haven't. It just hasn't come to me yet.
A question about you wrote a two or maybe three books collaborating with Clive Cussler, and I remember when you were talking when those books were coming out, one of the things you said was that it was an interesting process because you know he always emphasized make the book fun, make it and has that kind of and you said that never really occurred to me, you know, in the same way. Has that had an effect on your writing since?
Um, I don't know. I think to some extent it's temperament, but it was something that that I was fascinated with at the time. It seemed to me to be, well, of course, you know, what a smart thing to say or to think, and but at the same time, when I sit down in front of the paper, the empty paper, uh, that isn't what I think about. I guess I think about consciousness. What's it feel like? What does, you know, a particular situation feel like? And I'm sort of, I guess, um, interested in something that's puzzles me and might puzzle a reader too.
Right.
So I don't know.
So Tom, what about the old man? What has COVID put a stop? Or
Oh,
can you update us about it?
well, actually, it's a very sad story in a way, because what happened was the people that do Fargo and you know, those things, Warren Littlefield and company, um, you know, or the people that were going to do it, the people who did The Handmaid's Tale and all that also, and they got not only Jeff Bridges to be the old man, but John Lithgow to be his nemesis, who was essentially kind of all of the upper level CIA people rolled into one. And what's her name? Amy Brenneman to be Zoe. So, you know, it was a wonderful cast. They managed to shoot the first 7 episodes.
Wow.
And they had a couple of you know, new younger people that are not as well known, who were also wonderful actors, and everything was going terrifically well. And COVID came after they'd shot 7 episodes. They were going to reconvene about a month and a half later, because it was the holidays, believe it or not. And they even built sets in Morocco to get ready for the desert stuff. And, you know, they had to leave and go away and shut down, as all of that industry did. They, you know, shut down for months and months. And as they were getting ready to shoot episodes 8, 9, and 10, Jeff Bridges, this is not a secret, Jeff Bridges has announced this, but he was diagnosed with lymphoma. So he has lymphoma, and is under treatment for it. And so it's hard to know exactly when he'll be back and when they'll be ready to shoot the final episodes, or whether they'll, show any of them before the whole thing is finished. I don't know. It really is the kind of decision that's made somewhere up in the clouds, and then your agent tells you that, what's going on. But
Wow.
it's, the only, just to say this, I mean, not only is my experience of meeting and talking to and communicating with Jeff Bridges been a good one. But everybody that I talked to, and I talked to a lot of people who worked on the show, who were working at it, they love him. And the only expressions that anybody has had about this is not, oh, this messes up my career or my schedule for the next year, or whatever it is that, happens in show business to people. The only concern that anybody associated with it has expressed is, how is he? How is he doing? Is he well? Is he, getting better? Et cetera. And, he keeps sending out sort of messages to his fans and continuing to do things. Like, he just gave away one of his personal guitars for some, to be auctioned off for charity. That's where his mind is. His mind is on other people and on, being a positive force in the world. And so, everybody's just rooting for him. And when he comes back, we'll, maybe get to see the show.
Well, I sure hope that, with 7 of them in, it would really be terrible to waste them. So I hope they can figure out some way to, to bring it all together. But we've been living in such uncertainty now for months, but I like to feel that we're merging into a better 2021. We just don't know how long it will take to get there.
That's right. That's right. And, we all have, I think we're all just kind of mystified still. We all need to look at this from 5 years from now, look back and figure out exactly what happened to all of us.
Well, we won't know. I mean, history can't be written until it becomes history. So we'll find out. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you, Tom. Thank you for letting us do the virtual launch for Eddie's Boy. I always treasure something you said to me, which was, you never like to go on book tour until we start together, because you don't know what to say about your book until I tell you.
That's true. That's very true. I did say that, and it remains true. And I've got some ideas for future future conversations that I may have about this book from tonight.
Hey, Tom, real quick, how's Jo's work coming along? Does she have any new books in process?
Yes, she does. She's hard at work on one. In fact, most of the day today until the water pipe in the front of our house coming from the street
oh man,
leak and turned into a geyser. So she was working until then. So that was good.
That's great.
Well, we're really glad to hear that. I hope both of you, I know that Hanukkah's coming up when it starts on the 8th, I think, of December.
I haven't looked yet, but
fairly soon. So let me wish you both a very happy holiday, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your virtual tour, so to speak. It's really been a treat and thank you for signing our copies. Patrick, did we mention that we in fact have autographed copies of Eddie's Boy, fresh from the hand of Thomas Perry, right over here with his signature in there, right?
Very stylized signature.
It is. So you don't want to miss that. I always forget to say that until we get to the end and probably lose some of the audience. But in any case, Tom, thank you for signing the books for us. We really appreciate it. And when we can travel, maybe you guys can come over and we'll do some sort of follow-up. You never can really talk about the whole book at the beginning. So, what we may have in 2021, we may be able to do some like book discussion things with authors afterward, which gives you an excuse to come see us, right?
That's right. I'll take any excuse. I'd love to come there. So,
That'll be great. Patrick, thank you for doing the tech. And
Of course,
Tom,
absolutely.
talk to you soon.
Have a
Bye.
great night. Happy holidays.